you know, we're a high producing team. I'd say about 60% of what I do is listings. The other part is buyers. And I guess that's really all I got to talk about on that front. But today we're going to talk about negotiation. So this is one of the probably most important skills that you're going to have as a real estate agent, especially in the market that we're in right now. So if you all are working with buyers right now, and you're engaged in the market, I think it's pretty clear that negotiating skills and your ability to communicate effectively with the other agent, especially going into putting an offer in on a piece of property, is paramount, because everything that gets listed is typically going to be multiple offers. So you've got to figure out a way to craft an offer that's going to be most attractive to that seller. And one of the ways we do that is by building goodwill, I think, with the other agent. That's a huge part of what we do. But there will be other markets that you're going to work in where we're going to be in the polar opposite of where we are now. So right now we are in a seller's market. So it's kind of ironic when we talk about, you know, negotiating for a win-win, right? Pretty much the buyers win in this market is that they actually get a house, but they're pretty much having to hand over their ability to basically ask for almost any concession on a house. So it's very, very challenging. But you will also see markets, if you're in this industry long term, where we're going to see the opposite be true, where there's a billion listings and there's no buyers on the horizon, and in order to sell houses, you know, sellers are making reverse offers to buyers in order to lure them in. I mean, so we're going to see, you know, we're going to see those different markets take place, you know, here in Louisville at some point in time. So we're going to kind of look at it from all angles today, but we're definitely going to focus and hone in most specifically on the market that we're in today, because that's the one that you need to be prepared for. But just know that these truths don't always, what we're going to talk about today isn't a factor in every market that we see. All right. So I'm going to be using the PowerPoint as my basis for the class today, just so we make sure we hit all of the points that we need to. I am going to screen share in order to do that. Can everybody see my desktop at the moment?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is the PowerPoint, just so that we are all on the same page as to what in the world we're discussing. Okay. And this, I definitely consider this to be a interactive class. So if anyone, good Lord, if anybody has any questions or comments as we are rolling through this information, I'm trying to figure out how I get everybody back on my screen here. Please let me know. Please just chime right into the discussion. Okay. Okay, so things to consider. So how can your ability to negotiate affect the outcome of the deal? What are some ways that you negotiate in your everyday life? What are skills that great negotiators possess? And why is asking questions important when negotiating? Okay, so let's hit these topics really quickly. So your ability to negotiate is again paramount in affecting the outcome of the deal on a couple of fronts, because especially in a market like we're in now. So for those of you who are maybe pre-licensed or just getting licensed and you haven't ventured out into this real estate market, so we are seeing the extreme effect of supply and demand. So there's very, very little supply and there's a very, very high demand. So that means that buyers don't have a whole lot to choose from. So when a house goes on the market, It's flooded with showings. It's flooded with interested buyers. And oftentimes we are working multiple offer situations, meaning that that seller is going to have quite a few offers to choose from. So we have to, as agents and buyer representatives, we have to figure out how we put together the best offer that our client can feel comfortable with. Okay, that's a huge part of this. We don't want to overextend our buyers, but that also yields the highest chances that our offer is going to get chosen in that scenario. And working through how we do that in order to get a win-win for everybody. So, what things are important to that seller? It's important for us to understand those things, because price is really important. I mean, obviously price is king. In this market, sellers want to get as much as they possibly can, but that may not be the most important thing to them. Maybe a fast closing, or maybe a long closing, or maybe having that deal be contingent on the seller finding an acceptable property before they have to close. There's just a lot of different things that we could consider writing into an offer that isn't just all about price, that might give our clients the leg up. Okay. So if you don't have a conversation with the other agent about what that seller's, what terms are important to that seller, you're never going to know how to craft that best offer. Okay. So what are some of the ways that you negotiate in your everyday life? Anybody want to share everyday negotiation skills?
You negotiate what you're going to have for dinner.
That's right. Especially if you have kids. Yeah, so negotiating what you're having for dinner. Almost everything that we do in interaction with other people in some ways is a negotiation. In our jobs, we negotiate with our clients every single time we pick up the phone on some level. It may not be directly involving an offer, but in some way where we are engaging in a negotiation. So there is a really great book, and the name of it now escapes me. I can look it up. I just listened to it on Audible. Hold on, I'm going to get the name of it. And I highly recommend, it's called Never Split the Difference. It's by a guy named Chris Voss. And
great book.
Yeah, it's a great book. And he talks about how we negotiate in our everyday lives. But this is a guy who, he's like a crisis negotiator for, like, I don't even know, like the CIA or something. But he's very fascinating. And he talks about the different types of skills that we can employ in our everyday negotiating skills to get what we want. And oftentimes we can do it in such a way that the other party doesn't even recognize that you're negotiating with them, or that you are bringing the outcome that you want, but making it appear to be their idea. So anyway, that's a really great book. I highly recommend it for those of you who haven't heard. And I think it's an audio book. So if you want to listen to it in the car, like I did, but it's a very prescient book.
Libby, what was the author's name again?
Chris Voss, Voss, and it's called Never Split the Difference.
Perfect, thanks.
Oh yeah, no problem. Okay, what are skills that great negotiators possess? I think more than anything, asking questions, okay? Trying to know what you need to know before you proceed forward in that process. Also being able to recognize the ways in which you can craft something where everybody gets what they need, okay? Why is asking questions important when negotiating? Because it's gonna help you get to the meat of what you need to know to be able to craft the best offer, okay? So let's dig in a little bit deeper on those topics. So in brainstorming negotiation issues, so let's talk about that for a second. Does anybody want to throw out something about negotiating or writing an offer that may seem intimidating, or maybe you're dealing with one right now, or maybe you've got a property under contract, or maybe you've made an offer and lost the multiple offer situation for one reason or the other? Does anybody have a specific brainstorm on a negotiating issue that you've dealt with recently that you want to bring up?
I'm happy to share one.
Okay. Go
Yeah,
for it.
I was actually doing my first buyers. It just happened to be my parents, which made it a little bit easier. But they were looking for a condo here in Glen Mary, and so the house had been on the market since September 11th. It had been reduced down, but it was really difficult for me to figure out. My mom wanted to do a really kind of a low ball offer, and I told her the low balls now pretty much are, the asking price. So I was really, really nervous about, okay, what do I do? I know she likes to think she got a good deal. Mm-hmm. So how do I work this? So I, pretty much we had decided that she wanted to do a 240 and the asking price was 250, right? So, we were kind of, that name of that book, Split the Difference thing, which is the way we went at it. But I was really scared that she would lose the deal because it was so much lower than the asking price. They came back with 248 and she accepted. This was just last week, but still it was very nerve-wracking for me because not only just because it was my parents, but, feeling like in this market that I can go a lower price when I know that's not what the norm is.
Sure. Well, and there's so many things so the very, very first thing as an agent, if I'm walking into a showing where I know that my client has a pretty high interest in this particular piece of property, I'm going to look at the big picture. So the very first thing I'm going to do is read the agent notes. Okay. So for those of you who all don't know what agent notes are, when you go into the MLS, you have public remarks, which is what everybody sees on Zillow and Trulia, where the agent discusses all of the wonderful things about this house that they've listed. And then you have an agent notes section, which only agents can see, and they can only see it in the MLS. And oftentimes, this is where agents specify when showings begin, when the seller is going to review and respond to offers, or any other kinds of specifics that the seller is, whatever conditions the seller is putting around this listing or reviewing offers, or maybe they put some data in there like washer and dryer do not remain, or the brand new refrigerator in the kitchen doesn't remain. I mean, anything that agents specifically need to know about that listing will usually be in the agent notes, but not always, okay? Because not everybody does that. So this is why it's really important if you're heading into a listing where you know that your client has a high level of interest, call the agent before you show the house. Ask them some key questions. What kind of showing activity are you getting on that house? Are you holding or expecting any offers at this juncture? Should my client be interested and decide to write an offer, can you tell me what things, what elements of an offer your seller is looking to achieve beyond price? Because obviously, especially if they're going to be negotiating multiple offers, price is important, but maybe there are other things that are important to the seller. Maybe having some possession post-closing is really important to the seller. Maybe they want an extra long closing. Maybe they want a short closing. Maybe, there's a million different aspects that we could hone in on. But if you're not asking the question of the listing agent, you're not getting any information. And most good agents will be willing to have that conversation with you. Every once in a while, you'll come up against somebody who's just like, doesn't want to talk to you at all. But in most scenarios, a good listing agent is going to want to get what they can for their seller. And so they're going to want to communicate those things. Another big picture is, how long has that house been on the market? So just note that especially in markets like this, when houses don't sell right away, sometimes agents will take the listing down and relist it. So it will actually pop up on the hot sheet on the MLS as if it's a brand new listing, but it's actually been on the market for 60 days. So I think that in this market, if a house isn't going under contract in the first 10 to 14 days it's on the market, it's probably, the price is completely wrong. The seller is probably pretty off base with what their expectations are. So I think that once we get past, like, I'd say day 25, 30, I'm advising my clients that there's probably some room to negotiate. But before I do that, I want to look at the listing history, because if that seller just made a $10,000 price reduction, I probably can't come in with another, with an offer that's another $15,000 below that price without insulting them, right? So we have to look at it big picture. So research as much as you can. And then obviously running a CMA, because you also need to understand when you're working with buyers in this market that listing agents for the most part are shooting for the stars when it comes to their list price. And the buyers are either going to accept it or they're going to reject that listing. Okay. So we want to make sure that we are doing our research as agents for our buyers, especially to make sure that the price that they're agreeing to pay isn't incredibly off base to start with. And that CMA will also give me some negotiating room with that listing agent. When I go to put that offer together, if we're going to work the price, I'm going to send my CMA with that offer and say, hey, agent, respectfully, we kind of did some market research on what the value of this property was. Here's the value that we're coming up with. Respectfully, if I've missed something, if I've overlooked a comp, please let me know. So we kind of, we don't want to seem passive aggressive about submitting that, but it also kind of helps just give some perspective that we've done our homework and we're not seeing eye to eye on the price, but here's why. It's not just this willy-nilly like lowball offer. We're actually basing it on actual market data. So sometimes that kind of helps grease the wheels when we're in a market, especially where it's a buyer's market and we are making lowball offers. And that's the market where sellers are chasing after buyers. Buyers are seeing how low the seller's willing to go. It's a very, very different world. But the same can be said for this kind of market if it's a house that's been listed for, I'd say, longer than 2 or 3 weeks on the market, then they're probably off base with their price. So anyway, so brainstorming negotiation issues. Let's see here. So again, in digging in on multiple offer situations, I think that it's key to kind of build a relationship with that agent. And I just want to mention, while we're on this topic of relationships with other agents. So when we talk about being KW agents, one of the things that I think we pride ourselves on as agents that work for this particular market center or the KW market centers at large is that we really stress having good relationships with other agents and treating other people respectfully. And I will tell you that when we have market shifts where things get really, really competitive, that goodwill that you've built with other agents and the kind of reputation that you've built in the industry goes such a long way. Because I can't tell you how many times I was in multiple offer situations this past year, and either as a listing agent or as a buyer's agent, where let's say, for example, on the listing side, there were offers from agents that were nightmare agents to work with. I mean, I hate to say that, but it really affected, my conversation with my seller when we were reviewing those offers, that, hey, my past experience with this particular agent was pretty terrible. Like, this person was very difficult to work with. It was not a good experience. And so that will, in some senses, can stigmatize an offer. But on the opposite end of that, there were other times where, where the other agent reached out to me directly to say, hey, can we get to this place with your offer, because I'd really like to do the cross sale with you, because you've been so great to work with in the past. So goodwill with other agents is so important, and that is precisely why. It also makes your life a lot easier in the industry at large, but that really makes a big difference. Let's see, any other specific negotiating issues that anybody kind of wants to talk about specific? Anything you've dealt with? Anybody have anything? Okay, so we'll move on. So common points of negotiation: price, and then we have other terms. So other terms is basically anything else, is basically how is your buyer going to finance? What is their strength as a buyer as far as, down payment? How much earnest money are they going to put up? Are they going to do a home inspection? How long do they want to do home inspection? How long do they want to complete their due diligence? Are they going to make it contingent on an appraisal? Are they going to ask for closing costs? Are they going to ask for a home warranty? Are there any other concessions that your buyer is going to ask for? Do they want the washer and dryer to stay? It's pretty much assumed in most real estate deals that the kitchen appliances are going to stay. But what about the garage refrigerator? What about the washer and dryer? What about the play set in the backyard? What about the generator? What about the riding lawnmower for the 5-acre estate? Like, so there's a lot of other things that can be negotiated in terms. And you need to know what kind of situation you're walking into to be able to craft the best set of terms. Okay. That's why communication with the other agent to know what the climate is for this particular property is so incredibly important. Okay. So, and just remember, it's not always about price, because I've had lots of listings this past year that the offer we chose was not the highest price, but the buyer limited my seller's liability on the appraisal. Some cases, the buyer said they wouldn't do a home inspection, and they didn't ask for closing costs. They didn't ask for a home warranty. They gave my seller basically the choice to close. So basically, they set a closing period, but then specified that they would close at the convenience of the seller. So there's a lot of other points that we can use to make our offers strong without throwing out an insane price, because we still need to represent the best interests of our clients, in the sense that I don't want to be the agent that sells my client a house at 15% above list price, and then they suddenly get relocated and they call me in 3 years to sell their house, and I have to deliver the terrible news to them that there is absolutely no way on God's green earth that I'm going to be able to sell their house anywhere near what I just advised them to pay for it 3 years ago. Okay, so I don't want to be that agent. I want to sell real estate responsibly. So and actually, on that point, when we talk about negotiating, working with our clients, the best that you can do as an agent is advise your client what is possible and help them craft the offer that they can feel comfortable with. So the way that I usually term it with my clients, or I explain it to my clients, is I want you to put forward the offer that you would feel comfortable and satisfied if you lost the offer, and you would feel comfortable and satisfied if you won the multiple offer situation. Okay. So I don't want my clients to get cold feet the next day going, oh my God, like, why did we make that crazy offer price? And why did we agree to not do a home inspection? And why did we agree to make it not contingent on an appraisal? And oh my gosh, like, that scenario, I will say, in this market as a listing agent, I've also had a lot of buyers after we put our house under my listing under contract, that in the first couple of days after the buyer got cold feet and did a termite inspection and then walked away because they gave more than what they felt comfortable with in the beginning, and then they kind of they regretted it after the fact. So when we're working with our buyers, that is the goal of what we're trying to accomplish in a multiple offer situation, is trying to figure out that fine line between giving what we need to be able to win the deal, but at the same time, not asking our clients to stretch much further than they feel comfortable. All right. So use negotiation tips to respond to common points. I don't know does anybody know what that means? I don't even know what that's suggesting. So use negotiation tips to respond to common points. Okay. So, so let's just move on from that. Okay. So the 3 P's approach to negotiation: prepare, present, and position. Okay. So the preparation would be us doing our homework, knowing what we need to know about that listing as agents so that we can best communicate the points of the offer and how we're crafting the offer on the buyer side. But on the listing side, how we're reviewing those offers side by side, right? There's an agent in our office who has already put together a really great like a spreadsheet where she basically plugs all of the multiple offers into them so that she can look at them side by side. So for those of you who do not know how to run a net sheet, basically in short terms, like a net sheet is a calculation of seller's net proceeds. So if you're working with a listing, okay, if you're the listing agent on a piece of property, you've listed it, you've received multiple offers, and you're trying to figure out which one might have the greatest strengths, okay? But if you're looking at it surely from a price standpoint, if that is the only thing your client cares about is getting the most money for this particular listing, then we need to understand what the cost of sale is, okay? So we need to understand how to take an offer price and calculate what the seller is going to net from that sale approximately, okay? So what we're deducting would be things like commission, would be things like county transfer tax. If the buyer's asking for home warranty, is the buyer asking for any closing cost concessions? They're going to pay anywhere between $500 and $600 for closing attorney fees. Okay, that's kind of like the seller's like closing costs. What do they owe presently on their mortgage? Like what's their approximate payoff if they've got a mortgage lien on the property? And then any other concessions that they might be having to pay. And then we come up with that net number. Okay, so this could be a really good way to help a client look at offers side by side to figure out which one we're going to respond to. Okay, or in a market where it's not multiple offers and where the buyer comes in and makes a really low ball offer, even in that case, I'm going to run a net proceeds calculation based sheerly on that offer, so that my clients are, rather than looking at it through the lens of what the offer price is, they're looking at it through the lens of what they're going to make off of that particular sale. So sometimes reversing that and helping them see it through that lens will help your client to wrap their brain around maybe getting a low offer and how they respond to it in the most intelligent way to get what they need out of that transaction. Okay. Okay, so prepare, present. Okay, so presenting an offer is incredibly important in how we do that as agents. So if my clients decide to write an offer, I'm immediately reaching out to that listing agent who I've hopefully already communicated with in some capacity to ask some questions prior to. But I let them know officially that we are going to write an offer. Okay, so that gives them an opportunity that if they have received or are expecting any other offers, this would be a great time for them to tell me that. And I will ask that question if they don't share the information with me. Okay, so then I sit down with my client, we look at big picture and we decide what that offer is going to be, how we craft it. Okay, and then comes presentation. Okay, do not just send an offer to somebody via email and don't tell them that you've sent them an offer. Okay, send the offer, then you need to either text them, or I'd recommend really a phone call to let them know. Now, if they're not really good, some agents are not really great about answering their phone. So if it's not somebody that readily answers their telephone, I will usually send them a text as well, just to say, hey, please confirm. Now, I want to just make a quick reminder. There were some rules, like legal rules that changed within the last 18 months that requires that if you are listing a piece of property and you receive an offer, you have to communicate back to that agent on the initial receipt of offer to let them know when you will be presenting that offer to your seller. So anytime I get an email or a text or a phone call from an agent telling me we have sent you an offer, it is in your inbox, My immediate response is, thank you so much for your offer. I will be forwarding that to my seller now, and I will be reviewing with them at X time. Okay. But at the very, very least, you need to let them know immediately that you have sent that, you are sending or have sent that offer to your seller. Okay. After that, any counteroffer negotiations, you do not have to do that for, but in the initial offer, you have to provide a timeline for that agent as to when you shared it with your seller. Okay. And presenting the offer as well. If it is a multiple offer situation, I usually like to try to have a conversation with that agent about the high points. If I feel like it's going to be really difficult to get that agent's ear, because I will tell you this, listing agents that are in a very, very high stress situation where there's a lot of interest and a lot of offers, oftentimes will tend to shut down. They don't want to have a million conversations with a million agents about this house, and things start to get really, really competitive, and they kind of stop communicating at some juncture. So basically what I do is when I send an offer, I highlight the points. I say, I'll address it to the agent, dear agent, I've attached my client's offer for purchase of your property, whatever the address is, along with the signed seller disclosure, buyer pre-approval letter, any other documentation that I want to include in that. And usually I will, if I know it's a multiple offer situation, I will highly, highly recommend that my clients do some kind of a personal letter kind of talking about who they are, because oftentimes, when I'm an agent just looking at multiple offers, a name on a page is meaningless. But sometimes when I have something that kind of connects the person to the offer, it can make a difference. So if you're not already advising your clients do that, go ahead. Just know that the listing agent is not required, because it's not an offer document. They're not required to put that in front of their seller. And oftentimes they will hold that document, that letter back, just to kind of keep it, to the point, to keep it all business, but it's still worth time and effort to put that together. Okay. So in addition, in that email, I'm going to highlight the points of my offer. Let me quickly highlight for you the advantages of this offer. My client's putting 20% down, or they're a cash buyer, or, we've come in at above list price and we're going to make it not contingent on an appraisal, or we'll offer a very short inspection period. And we'll limit repairs to no more than $2,500 in repair asks, based on the results of the home inspection. Whatever things that we've done in our offer to give ourselves an advantage, we're going to highlight that in that email. We always ask them to confirm receipt and to please call us if they have any questions. And then again, you're going to send that email, and then you're going to follow up with the agent, and hopefully they'll have a conversation with you. We can also reiterate all of those highlights of your offer in that phone call. All right. Anybody have any questions about that?
I don't have any questions, Libby. It's Shelley, by the way. But that's brilliant. So I've never summarized what was in the information. I've always said, here's my offer, here's the pre-approval, sign, disclosures, yada, yada, yada. But I've never summarized, and I'm so stealing that idea. It's beautiful.
Well,
thank you.
I'm going to do this really quick. Let me just give you an example of an offer that we wrote that way.
Oh, it seems so practical. I just love it.
And then you all can, when I pull it up, you all could screenshot it really quick, maybe. Okay, so here's kind of an example. Here, let me pull this email up in its entirety so you're not looking at a page of it. Okay. So basically this was a multiple offer situation. They had 4 offers on the table. We ended up winning that particular multiple offer situation. So again, I just talked about how my clients love the home, that they would be honored to call this house, their home. The buyer is very well approved. The husband's a doctor with a solid income and job security. You all, that is huge during COVID, is being able to sell your clients job security, because especially if they're getting financing, it means they can actually bring this deal to the closing. Okay, so that's a huge, huge point just specific to COVID related in your negotiations that I would highlight always. And as a bonus, they have a longstanding relationship with their lending institution. They purchase many properties through Citizens Bank. Okay. And then I quickly list the highlights of the offer, that it's above asking price with no contingency, no inspections. The buyer will take the property as is, where is, no closing costs to be paid by seller, and no home warranty to be paid by seller. Buyer is allowing your seller delayed possession of the property until 3 p.m. the day after closing. Buyer agrees to close at the seller's convenience, provided there's 7-day notice of a closing date and the lender is ready to close. So that would be an example of how we would present it in this particular case. So that's, yeah. I've always found that's been pretty beneficial. So if you couple that just with kind of building some rapport with the agents on the front end, I feel like it really helps grease the wheels for you and your client in negotiation process. Okay. All right. Any other questions about that?
Libby, I have a question. This is Chelsea Del Grosso.
Hi, Chelsea.
Hi. I was just wondering, like, I just saw how you phrased the email about like my clients, they and their children. I had wondered, have you ever run into this problem writing such things and then having issues with like fair housing, where you're kind of like revealing their family status or anything like that?
No, I mean, no. I mean, obviously, I mean, in this case, I'm just trying to let the agent know like who my client is. I mean, and this is, this particular house was like, it was a 5-bedroom house. There's a play set in the backyard that, so obviously I'm kind of just playing to the idea that, that my client, the house is a good fit, but that really doesn't affect anything on the fair housing front at all. Now, if my clients didn't want me to disclose that they were a family, then I wouldn't do that. But I mean, this is really to kind of their advantage. The only time fair housing really would be violated in this situation would be if the seller like chose an offer, decided to like base who they chose the offer on that particular element. Does that make sense? But
right.
as the agent representing the client, I can really say anything that I want on that front, just that I feel like might be an advantage or help the seller just wrap their brain around like who my clients are, like what their intent here is,
Right. Okay, super. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right. If there's no other questions, I'm going to move on to the next slide. So prepare. So we've got to know your goal. You've got to know your client. On the know your client point, do not wait to wrap your brain around and understand how they plan on purchasing this property. Like, are they using financing? If they are, have they been pre-approved? I mean, you just cannot write an offer in this market, especially if your buyer has not already been looked at by a lending institution. Know the loan product they're going to use. Are they using a conventional? Are they FHA? Are they VA? Are they going to use some kind of KHC product? Is it a bridge loan? How are they paying for this? Is it cash? You need to know that going into the process, just because it makes your life less stressful. And if you know those things going into the process with your client, especially when it comes to multiple offer situations, you can figure out where your advantage is. Okay. So for example, it's really, really difficult in a market like this to be a 0% down VA buyer, because the advantage of a VA loan is that you can put 0 down. Okay. But when I'm looking at a multiple offer situation as a listing agent, and I see that there is a buyer that is putting 0 down on a VA loan, I also know that if that appraisal comes back short, does that buyer have any money to bring to the table to make up any kind of appraisal shortfall that could happen? So I'm looking at it through a lot of different lenses. So if I'm working with a VA buyer, for example, I'm going to figure out what ways we could potentially strengthen our offer from that standpoint, that isn't sheerly, that kind of takes away or detracts from the fact that maybe they don't want to put any money down. Okay. So, but it would require me to understand that and know that before the process starts. And you certainly don't want to be under the gun to kind of figure that out in the midst of a multiple offer situation on their dream house, where you've got 5 hours to submit an offer and you can't reach their lender, etc. So know your client, know their situation before you head into this process. Think ahead. I would categorize that under that, just know the property that you're showing them, especially if they have told you in advance that this is a house they're very interested in. Do your research, know the listing history on that house, know days on market, know any kind of details you need to know from the agent notes, and make a phone call to that agent before you show it. Just to know what you need to know before you walk through that front door. Set very clear expectations, be informed, obey the laws. I mean, that's kind of a given, but if you have any questions about that, please contact your broker or a real estate attorney immediately. One of the things that I would say is that in a market like we're in now, or just any market where you're in extremes, and even one where we're not, if you are crafting a clause in other provisions of the contract, so in other words, if you're crafting a particular term that doesn't already exist in the purchase agreement. So there is a section of our contract where you can write in whatever you want. And if you are not exactly sure on how you craft that language to convey your intent or your client's intent, please call your broker or call a real estate attorney for that information before you write that in, okay? Because you don't want that to not be clear, or write it in such a way that doesn't convey the intent of your client, okay? Because you're the expert. Just remember that. So know the documents inside and out. So it is obviously imperative that you understand the terms of the purchase agreement, both in language and in practice. And some of that comes from experience just in writing offers and, fully executing a real estate deal from start to finish. But it also comes from, I think, hearing a lot of different people from different perspectives talk about the contract. So there are some really great classes through GLAR, continuing education, that talk about our purchase contract, because GLAR they are the people who put that contract together in coordination with lots of local real estate attorneys advising. But we also have some great classes here at KW about the purchase contract. I would just say, get in front of as many different people as you can that are teaching the contract, because they all look at it through a little bit different lens and they all have different experiences to share with you. Because unfortunately, sometimes the best way we learn contracts is when the doo-doo hits the fan on one of those terms. And you learn the hard way by going through sometimes a very stressful experience with regards to maybe closing period or lending, or some other term that was maybe a little bit ambiguous in the contract, and the seller understood it one way and the buyer understood it another way. So just know what it is that what you're writing up when you put pen to paper. Okay. And if you have any questions about it, you need to contact whoever it is, the authority that can answer the question, and make sure that you're doing it the correct way. Okay. Any questions about that? Okay. So asking questions is the key to gaining information to win a negotiation. Okay. So open-ended questions. So questions that have unlimited response options. What additional information should I know about this listing? So it kind of gives this, oftentimes they will tell you things that, maybe aren't even really in the best interest of their clients for you to know, but sometimes they'll just spurt it out. So the open-ended questions are really key. What is important to your seller about closing in 30 days? So understanding what is their why. Well, they have a contingent contract on their dream home. So we need to get this closed in 30 days so that they can buy that house, so that they can get to Florida to see their grandkids, so that they can not go into foreclosure, whatever their reason is, whatever their why is, we've got to understand that to be able to best negotiate for our clients. How do you feel about that, whatever that is? Closed-ended questions are things that give a definitive answer, a yes, no, one word. So do you have to sell your home by a specific date? Do you have any other offers? What is bottom line price you would consider? I don't really ever ask that specific question, especially even if I know my client's going to write a lowball offer. But anyway, all right, moving on. Okay, what would happen if blank? So this helps you anticipate the next steps of the negotiation, okay? Why is this important to you? This is going to help you gain more information and gain more insight into the other party. Or really, even if you're discussing writing up an offer with your own client. Okay. Okay, prepare, do. So ask questions to clarify and set expectations. Let's see. There's read a scenario on page 9, 3 P's approach, prepare and do. I don't know if you all have this in front of you, but if you do, I'm going to give you a second to do that because I'm going to use the restroom really quick. So I will be right back. Okay. All right. Be back in a second. Okay, sorry about that. I am back. Okay. Does anybody have any questions before we move on? Or anything to share? All right. Okay, so in learning, so pay attention to verbal or nonverbal cues. Keep quiet once you present an offer. Listen carefully to what is important to the other party. Stay calm and relaxed. Focus on the customer's needs. Give your offer the best chance. Okay. One thing I will say, this is related to current market and just as a listing agent who has dealt with a lot of multiple offer situations this year. While I think it's really important that any agent that has submitted an offer do follow up, just to kind of see where the offer situation is at that juncture. I also think that there's a very, very fine line between keeping posted on where your offer stands or maybe how many offers have been received up to that point. However, I have dealt with a lot of agents that were I don't really know a nice way to say it, were very pushy and kind of made pests out of themselves over it. So I would just say that it that it is probably wise to keep posted on where your offer stands. If you submitted an offer today and there was one other offer on the table, but they're not going to respond to offers, say for 2 more days, maybe each day you kind of just follow up and see where things are. Like, you know, do you mind updating me on where we stand as far as, you know, offers received? Is there anything that we could do at this juncture to help strengthen our offer based on what you have on the table? Those would be the kind of questions to ask, but just keep it polite, keep it friendly, keep it cordial, because I can tell you just from experience that I've dealt with a lot of just kind of agents that have been less than friendly during the process. So don't be one of those agents. Okay. All right. Let's see. In learning, so ask what and how questions when it comes to trying to get to the meat of how to best negotiate. So buyer wants to close in 60 days. The seller wants to close in 30 days. Okay. So a question might be, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you're requesting a 30-day closing. What is important about closing to you in 30 days? And if your client becomes defensive, you would explain, my goal is to let the buyer know why this is important to you. Okay, so first of all, I just want to say, for those of you who are not aware, lenders are really busy right now. So if your client is using lending, there's no way that deal is going to close in 30 days. Okay. So in fact, we even stopped writing 45-day closings into our offers. We've actually upped it to 50 because it's more reasonable. Underwriters are busy, lenders are busy, closing attorneys are busy. And that's just the market that we're in right now. So I think that if your buyer's using lending in any capacity and they want more than 7 days due diligence period to do their home inspections, a 30-day closing is incredibly lofty. Okay, now if they're a cash buyer, or if I know that there's some lenders out there that basically do a pre-approval where it's beyond pre-approval. They basically approve a buyer ahead of time, and then all they need to do is assign a property to it and get an appraisal. But even appraisals right now are taking, you know, easily 2 to 3 weeks in my experience. So just be careful with your closing periods right now. That's kind of on a different note. But essentially, when I'm working with a client and the buyer and the seller are at odds on a term, and we're trying to figure out how we come to reasonable agreement between the parties, to come to a meeting of the minds, that's basically what we want, right? So we've got to figure out the why on either why our client is stuck on a particular term or why the other party is stuck on a particular term. And we need to see how we can bend. And if we're going to bend on a term that my client maybe isn't exactly thrilled about bending on, I need to figure out how I get a win for them somewhere else. Okay. So the other thing is, if my client, let's say I'm working with a listing and they want a really fast closing, but that's just, you know, it's arbitrary. Would it be the end of the world if they had to close in 60 days rather than 30? No, probably not, but that's what they want. At the end of the day, it's all about price, right? Like, so well, it's not all about price, but if I can explain to them that that if they're willing to give on that front, that we can win somewhere else, right? So maybe we're more firm on price in order to, or we get a higher price in order to allow a longer closing period to make that happen. So we're just trying to figure out where the give and take is, both with our clients and with the other party, in order to kind of reach that point where the minds can meet. And just be prepared that some deals won't come there. Sometimes the seller won't come off their price at all, and the buyer, you know, is stuck at a price that's $20,000 under that list price, right? And there's no budging either party, and we all just come to the conclusion that maybe this deal wasn't meant to happen, and we all move on. So, but what's important is that we all try our best in the moment to try to make that happen. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. We move on. But we know in walking away from that deal that we've taken it as far as we can, and it just didn't happen. Does anybody have an example of where they've worked an offer thus far, maybe recently, and it didn't work out? Like it just never got to an acceptance? Beyond having your offer denied in a multiple offer situation.
This is Jonesy. I've had, gosh, it's happened several times. I had one, it was a several offer situation, and my guy had a certain budget. We did go, this was a few months ago when it was even crazier. So we did go above asking. We stretched his budget as far as we could.
Mm-hmm.
It was a great offer, but somebody offered them, no appraisal, no inspection, and like way even more above asking. We offered like 15 over. So lost that one, but we found him another one. But yeah, definitely lost that one. It was a bummer.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard in a market like this, but I will say that what'll be really interesting is when we see the market shift, and shifts happen surprisingly quickly. I mean, they leave cues that they're about to happen, but it's not like it's it's turning a ship, right? Like it kind of just happens pretty quickly when we see market shifts. So I think that the back end effects of COVID, that even though we are going to stay low inventory, and I do think interest rates are going to stay low for quite a while longer, and that will help spur the real estate market. I do think that the back end economic effects of COVID are probably going to eventually hit the real estate market. I think we're going to see some foreclosures. We're going to see some short sales. And I think that might affect the market in such a way that we might see a shift. As we go into that shift, it'll just be interesting because the way that we negotiate is going to change drastically. We're going to have to work much harder to come to a meeting of the minds between the buyer and the seller. And I have a lot of buyers in this particular market that took a break because they lost so many deals that they just got fatigued. And they were like, look, we don't even we don't have to buy right now. And we don't necessarily want to be in a market where we've got to pay $10,000 or 10% above list price, give no concessions. We just have to give everything over to the seller. And we would rather be part of a real estate market where we can negotiate, where we can actually negotiate terms, we can negotiate price, we can get some closing costs, et cetera. In some ways as an agent, like I kind of look forward to that shift because it'll be less stressful for me as an agent because I don't feel like I have to drop everything I'm doing to show a buyer a house in the first 3 hours it's on the market. And I also don't have to try to help my clients advise my clients how to make, the craziest offer we can make that makes them feel comfortable. So, I kind of like a more even-keeled market personally, because I think it's easier to do ethical real estate, but I also have a lot of buyers that will jump back in the market once the market kind of becomes a little bit less competitive. So, it's been crazy.
Hey, I have a question, Libby. This is Jonesy again. And you can speak to this now or whenever it makes sense. But I had a situation where I was in a negotiation and it was 60-day realty. So it's not kind of like if you're dealing with like a list service, basically. Do you have any tips on how to approach and or negotiate those?
Well, so in a limited listing agreement, like, I think it's Jay Bowman, and I don't think he does all of his deals like that, but some of them he does. But there's quite a few that do it that way. Steve Canfield is usually limited listing service, and Donna Mink. There's several. So they're basically, the information that they put on the MLS is supplied by their seller, right? But they are still contractually and legally obligated to present the offer in the same way that we would, okay? Like as like exclusive right to sell agents or full representation agents, okay? They still have to present their offers, and they still have to some degree advise their clients in that client's best interest, right? So it's not like, it doesn't necessarily act as a FSBO except on the end of like basically where they're posting it on the MLS, right? So I would say that those agents may be less likely to give you information on the front end, but I would still ask the question. Okay, I would still call them and ask those questions, because that agent still has an obligation. If you ask the question, they've got to go to their client and communicate that you've asked those questions, because they still have, there is still some representation there, if that makes sense. I would still present the offer the same way. You will feel like you have a little bit less control, I think, in those scenarios, but because that agent's goal by limiting their commission is that they do not want that particular sale to take up a lot of their time, right? They just want to be able to present, like, listed on the MLS with all the data that's been supplied by the seller, you know, get it under contract and then show up at a closing, right? But then communicate in between there about what's kind of happening. But so I guess in answering that question, I mean, I would still be asking all of those same questions and just see what I can get out of that agent. And if they're just not willing to give it, then you've got to do your best to craft the best offer for that particular situation, and, you know, let it fly and hope for the best.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Okay. So analyze counter tactics. So if we are in a situation where actual negotiation is going to happen, okay, so this would be a scenario, excuse me, like maybe the scenario that was brought up earlier, where your client's going to make a low offer, maybe on a house that's been on the market for a little while, okay? So it's important to kind of also understand what the next steps might be, okay? So anticipating how that party might respond to that offer, okay? So for example, let's say my client's making an offer on a house listed at $300,000, okay? And my client wants to come in, they want to come in at $275. Like, they really feel like that's a fair offer for that property. Well, it's pretty far under their list price, right? It's $25,000 under list price. But typically the way that I would handle that as an agent is maybe see if my client would be willing to come up to about 280. Okay. Maybe they'd be willing to budge just a little bit, come in with a little bit stronger of an offer, or this would also, we'd have to take into consideration whether or not they're going to ask for closing costs. Because one thing you have to remember, which I'm sure you've already thought through if you're making offers on buyers in this market, is what the seller is going to net. So in essence, if I'm making an offer of $300,000, but with $5,000 in closing costs, that's what I'm really doing, is making an offer for $295, right? So when we calculate in all of the concessions that the buyer is going to ask for, we've got to figure out a fair first offer, but anticipating that seller is probably going to counter offer back, and anticipating maybe where they're going to counter back. So in kind of trying to figure that out, one of the questions that I would be asking of the listing agent is, have you received offers and counter offered, you know, have you already worked an offer on this property, in other words, and maybe it didn't come to fruition, or maybe did it fall through on inspection? Did it fall through on appraisal? Like, trying to get to the meat of whether or not they've even worked an offer yet on that particular property. Because if they have, I want to kind of try to find out, well, you know, do you feel like there's some negotiability on your seller's part? And the agent will usually say, no, you know, the seller's really, really firm on their list price, or, you know, they're negotiable, but within reason. So that kind of tells me that there's a little bit of room for us to move. Maybe we get closing costs, maybe get a little money off of the purchase price. So we kind of sit down and craft an offer with the anticipation of where that seller is going to land on their counter. So let's say this $300,000 house, I get my clients to come in at 280, clean offer otherwise. Maybe they didn't ask for closing costs, but maybe they asked for a home warranty. Okay, that's pretty reasonable. And the seller comes back with the anticipation that the seller's going to come back maybe at 290 or maybe in the lower 290s. And then maybe we come back in the high 280s or maybe at 290. And then hopefully that's where we find a nice middle ground. Okay. But a lot of the negotiations that we do where we're actually working the price, we usually end up anticipating like landing in the middle of those two things. Okay. So I've been in counteroffers where we have literally counteroffered back and forth between the buyer and seller 15 times. Okay. So like every hour, a new counteroffer is sent back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until we finally, hopefully come to a reasonable agreement. All personalities are a little bit different between clients. So I have some clients that just want to get to they want to get to the meat of the negotiation very quickly. And then sometimes I negotiate deals where we counteroffer $2,000 apart, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until we hopefully reach an agreement. But sometimes the seller goes right for the throat and says, look, here's my counteroffer and it's my best and final, like take it or leave it. So you'll work with all different types of clients that feel very differently about this. So you just kind of have to read your client, but you also have to read the situation. So if the house is, getting a lot of other showings, or there's another interested party that is talking about writing an offer, we probably need to get to that kind of like, I wouldn't say best and final, but we need to kind of get to the meat of the negotiation like more quickly rather than kind of dancing around it. And we want to do it kind of, I think in most situations, you kind of want to do that as quickly as possible just to save everybody the time and energy and your own time and energy. But that every situation is going to be a little bit different. And when we do see a market shift where things aren't selling quite as quickly, then your strategy on this will be, will I guess come into play a little bit more than it does now. I have been in lots of negotiation situations in the past in less of a seller's market where the buyer will make a reasonable offer but lower and make it a best and final from the start. So basically the seller is now in a position where they either accept it or they decline it. And if they decline it, then the buyer walks. They've lost the deal. So it kind of puts the seller in a position where they have to put up or shut up. So it's all, I don't always like to play hardball, but sometimes I feel like if I'm reading big picture situations, sometimes it really is the best way to approach it. But again, doing your research ahead of time, having conversations with that other agent and knowing the situation and what you're walking into, is all going to determine how you craft that offer and how you decide to approach it. All right. Tactics. So we've got hot potato, good guy, bad guy, and nibbling. So this kind of touches on the points that we kind of just talked about. So counter tactics, asking for a concession in return before agreeing to any further concessions. Okay. So an example of this would be, well, listen, maybe I can get my seller to come down another $5,000, but in order for them to do that, they're going to need X. Okay. So we include something in that term or in that negotiation that wasn't already on the table in order for my seller to take that negotiation, or in order for my buyer to come up another $5,000 on price. So for example, listen, my buyer will come up another $5,000, but in order to do that, we want the washer and the dryer, and we want the riding lawnmower to stay with the house at no value. Okay. So under B, it's test the validity, find out if the problem is real. Has the party with the problem exhausted every other possible solution? So this I feel like is the biggest, this comes into play the most on closing date. And what the expectations are for that. So I have been in situations before where we've gotten multiple offer situations. My client, our on the seller side really wanted a specific closing date. And we had the discussion of, look, at this price with these terms, would it be worth it to you to be able to move out in advance, put your things in storage, and be willing to pay for a temporary living situation, maybe stay in a hotel or or rent somewhere for a month? Because I've had scenarios, especially on really, really high-end properties, where the buyer was a cash buyer, so it wasn't contingent on financing. They gave a really, really strong at list or above list offer price. And at the end of the day, in order for my client to win on one front, they would need to sacrifice on the other, because the buyer wouldn't give on the closing period, So we have to look at big picture situations, and also look at, with our own clients, if they are letting a minor obstacle tie them up on a bigger win, if they're looking at everything through the big picture. Does that make sense? So call them on their game. If it continues, then attribute what the bad guy says to the good guy, since they are a tag team anyway. So this will likely diffuse the tactic, because now you have two bad guys. So the good guy, bad guy is often played by, maybe negotiations that are not going well, and maybe the agent is playing the good guy, and they're like, look, my client's, the client is the bad guy. Like, we don't want to, my client doesn't want to move, and I'm so sorry, but like, I'm trying my best, but this is as far as I can get them to move. So I think that you kind of have to mirror and match the tactics of the other side. So if the party that you're negotiating against is playing hardball with you, then you need to get in gear and play hardball with the other party. So I think that it's all about in reading the situation. And as agents, look, we're going to work with every personality of agent on the other side of a real estate transaction. Or if you're ever working with for sale by owners, which God help you if you do. But I think that we just have to understand that we're going to work with every type of personality out there. Some agents are less fun to work with than others. Some are less diplomatic. And so I would just say that that whatever personality that you are working with on the opposite side of the deal, in some ways you need to mirror that. But I think that if you all have never read up on disc profiles, that this could be very, very beneficial. Because if you're working with a high D or a high E or a high S or a high I under the disc profiles, there are certain tactics that you can use if you can clearly see that the person that you're working with falls under one of those categories. And obviously doing the disc profiles is way, way too complicated for us to do right now. But I would definitely recommend reading up on that in working with personalities, not only within your own client realm, but with other agents as well. Okay. So employ the 3 Ps. So this is kind of where we would do some real play and some scripting on this front. Does anybody have any questions about maybe some specific scripts that we might use in certain situations? Or does anybody have any questions in general about, maybe a deal you're working right now, thinking about working? Or general questions about real estate at large? Anything you want to ask. The floor is open.
I guess the question I would have is, when you talk to an agent and you ask them what's, the most important thing on their end, how do you, what's the best way to relay that to your client to see if for them to try to build something along that way? Like, how do you work it into the conversation, and what can you tell them and what do you tell them for what you're trying to do?
You mean after I've had that conversation with the other agent and then I'm communicating back with my client?
Yes.
So from an agency representation standpoint, anything that's shared with me by the other party, I'm going to share. Now, sometimes I will edit that. Like if I feel like there's something that might ruffle my client's feathers or anger them or not, or be an impediment to the deal in some way, that's kind of like, so I like to say like I kid proof the information, but any vital information that's provided to me, I convey to my clients, but sometimes I might edit it just so, just again, to kind of keep the negotiation going, because I don't want to convey something that I feel like might insult them, like directly insult them. Yeah, I mean, I'm conveying anything that I can. And, you know, at the end of the day, we're trying to help these two parties come to a meeting of the minds. That's what the agents are really doing. You know, and then once that that negotiation has been reached and we're at a point of acceptance, then it's our job to carry that deal to the closing, okay, and representing our clients through the process of inspections and appraisal and lending and, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all the way down to closing. But in the initial, you know, in the initial process where we're just trying to come to an agreement on terms, I feel like that, you know, that it's my job to communicate what it is that other party is looking for, to find out if my client is even able to give them what it is that other client is looking for. Okay. And, you know, there have been times where I've advised my client, like walking into a situation, just to not write an offer. Like I've worked with people before where, you know, let's say the buyer, you know, I've worked with clients that wanted to come in, you know, $100,000 under a list price before. Like, I mean, just really, really absurd things that I knew were never going to go anywhere. And so there might be times where I explain to my client that, you know, look, this isn't going to be worthwhile. And if they're very adamant about it, then that's fine. I'll write it up and just apologize profusely to the other agent when I send the offer. Because I will tell you also, when we're in a market shift where we're now when we get to a point where we're in a buyer's market, which will eventually happen because all markets shift from one extreme to the other, you will write offers for your clients that you will be embarrassed to send. I'm just going to tell you that right now. It'll happen. And you've got to do your best to try to highlight all of the positive points of that offer, but sometimes that's just what we have to do. And I kind of gotten off point here, but I guess when it comes to what I share everything possible between that's communicated by the other party, so that in doing so, I can explain where the other party stands, what they're trying to achieve, what their goals are, and where their limits are, so that if we're actually going to engage in this process to try to be successful, that we can do that with eyes wide open and understand how we craft the best offer.
I think in situations like that, you have to also question the buyer's motivation. If they're writing crazy, really, really crazy offers, you really have to, you know, have they done everything that they're supposed to do? Like, you know, get pre-approved? Do they have money in the bank? Or are they just waiting, saving up money or something like that? And if that's the case, you're wasting your time even showing them property, because you want to make sure that they are prepared, that when they do see something, that they can write an offer on it and let them know that, you know, this isn't the market to play that game.
Sure. Well, I think in scenarios, I will say too, I do a lot of work in the luxury market as well. So, you know, the luxury market is kind of a unique fish in the fact that it oftentimes sellers will overvalue their property when they've got a really, really high-end property, and it probably doesn't have a chance of selling for that. Like actually, when we get it on the market, the buyer's actually willing to pay. And so I would say, like in the scenarios, I will just mention as a caveat, in the scenarios where I've had people make offers $100,000 under list price, a lot of times it will be directly related to maybe a higher end listing. But you're right. I mean, if we are walking into a multiple offer situation and my client wants to come in $20,000 under list price, I just told them, look, this is an exercise in futility. Like, we're just wasting our time, because I can tell you that probably everything they have on the table is at or above list price. So if you do not feel like this property can command the value that they're asking, then we should just move on, because it's kind of just, it's a waste of everyone's time. However, I will say there have been times where I've written offers under list price in this market, and been in a multiple offer situation, and we've still won. So, but typically that is tied to a price point that is above like $500,000. Okay. So I think that if you're anywhere under the 350 or under, and it's a multiple offer situation, you can pretty much guarantee it's probably going for above list price. So it's all, but again, I think in digging in and asking those important questions, that listing agent, asking the question, how strong are the offers that you have on the table? And a lot of times they won't give you specifics on what the values of what the number is on those offers, like the price point, but they may tell you, well, everything that we're holding right now is at or above list price, and if they don't tell you that, ask that question, are your offers at list price or above? Ask the yes or no question, and maybe they'll tell you.
What's your stance on what you tell people?
So I try to be pretty careful in multiple offer situations, because I feel like it's really important that that there's a level playing field, that everybody feels like that's working an offer or submitting an offer on my listing feels like they got the same information. So I always tell my clients, when I'm working on especially on the listing side, multiple offer situation, I will tell them that we typically don't want to auction off the property. So I don't like there's nothing that irritates me more than when I'm working a multiple offer situation on the buyer side and an agent's like, okay, well, we just got another offer, and it's and the offers for and they'll give you specifics to try to bid it up, like as if this is an auction. Does that make sense? I feel like, because I know that when that agent's coming to me and going, will you up your offer by $1,000? Then they're going to go back to the other agent and go, will you up your offer by $1,000? Will you up your offer? I don't like that kind of negotiating scenario. So, because I feel like I'm negotiating against myself, or I feel like my client's negotiating against themselves. So typically, if I'm the listing agent and I'm working multiple offer situations, I will just tell the people that are interested that, listen, all of our offers are very strong. Best and final offer needs to be submitted by this date, so that everybody knows the timeline and everybody knows that they've got to bring the best offer that they're willing to put forward. And then I try not to give too many specifics beyond that, other than specific terms. Like maybe my client wants to close, they want a long closing, they want an early closing, they want some delayed possession. Price is important to them. They'd rather not pay any closing costs. Let's see, and telling people, look, all of the things in a multiple offer situation that would be attractive to any seller would be attractive to my seller, such as maybe you don't want to do a home inspection. Maybe you want to make it not contingent on an appraisal, or limit the amount of liability that the seller would have if the appraisal did come back low. So again, I would direct those agents to those desirable things without giving too many specifics. Because again, I find that my client on the seller side in a multiple offer situation is going to have the biggest win when buyers have to use their imagination as to what the highest offer could be. I will also tell you, I want to touch briefly on something we haven't talked about yet, and that is escalation clauses. Is everybody familiar with what an escalation clause is? So an escalation clause is, it is a term that you can write into your offer where you agree in advance to beat any other offer that they have on the table by a specific amount of money. So let's say you tell the seller that you'll beat their highest offer by $1,000 up to X price point. So if you're writing in an escalation clause, you need to be very, very specific with your language, because you can get your client and your buyer client in a whole lot of trouble if you don't write that accurately. And I can share an example of an escalation clause. I'll actually email one to Amy Leo and have her kind of send one to you, but be very careful about your language. But here's the thing you got to know about escalation clauses. As a listing agent, if I'm in a multiple offer situation and I've got 5 offers on the table, and one of the offers came in with a really, really strong price, and the other ones came in with a fair price, but an escalation clause, I'm going to go with the person that made the really strong offer without the escalation clause. And when you're in multiple offer situations and everybody's making an escalation clause in their offer, it kind of becomes a meaningless exercise. So I have just found in my experience that just crafting an offer that is the best price and leaving the escalation clause out of it has been the best strategy for me and for my clients, at least as far as winning offers, because you're basically showing your client's hand anyway. You're telling the client, you're telling that other party, the seller, exactly what your client's willing to pay. So if they're willing to pay that, then just make that offer or make the offer that your client feels comfortable paying. But again, in a multiple offer situation, I kind of feel like everybody's figured out the advantage of the escalation clause. And so it sort of, if you're getting more than one offer with an escalation clause, it sort of becomes a meaningless thing. Anyway. All right. Any other questions? Comments? Situations that you want to talk through? All right. Does anybody have, I guess, given that a lot of you all are new agents in the business, does anybody have any like specific questions or issues that you're coming up against in getting established during COVID? It's kind of a hard time as a new agent to build a ground game for a lot of people.
Hey Libby, this is Chelsea.
Hi, Chelsea.
I just had I'm pretty new. I'm only 2 months in, but I had a question about something you just mentioned.
About what? I'm sorry.
Oh, I just had a question about something that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
You said about limiting the seller's liability based on an appraisal. I really have no idea what that means, so I'd appreciate if you could just elaborate on that.
So in some cases, depending on the strength of your buyer and how much money they have to put down on the property, okay, your buyer could agree to make up for a portion of the appraisal if it came back low. Okay, so if your client is getting an appraisal, which if they're using lending, they have no choice but to have an appraisal. And in this market, a lot of appraisals are coming back short because not only are appraisers being very conservative just because the values are going up so quickly in the market, but also because people are bidding above list price and they're already listing at the high end of what they could list for to start with. And then houses are selling for, you know, above that. So, so it just yields a greater possibility that appraisals are going to come back short. And if your buyer gets a short appraisal, if the appraisal comes back below contract price, then the parties have to figure out how we make up that difference, because the lender will only lend the appraised value or the purchase price, the agreed purchase price, whichever is lower. So if I put a house under contract at $300,000 and the appraisal comes back at $290,000, that means we have a $10,000 shortfall. We have to figure out how we bridge that $10,000 difference. So the buyer can bring $10,000 to the table. The seller can come down $10,000. Maybe the parties split the difference. The buyer brings $5,000, the seller comes down $5,000. I've had appraisals come back so short this past year that we've had to, the seller had to come down, the buyer had to bring some money, the agents agreed to cut their commission to make the deal work. So when I say limiting seller liability on the appraisal, so I've worked a lot of deals this year where either my buyer or the other buyer, if it was my listing, said in the offer that the buyer will will basically pay the first $10,000 in appraisal shortfall. So basically the buyer's saying up front, if the appraisal comes back short, we agree to pay the first $10,000 of that. But if the appraisal came back $20,000 short, then that means my seller would have to come down 10, buyer would bring 10, and that's how we would negotiate it. So basically give some preliminary terms on how we're going to navigate an appraisal shortage if one were to happen. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. The other case is where we've negotiated a lot of deals this year that were not contingent on a home inspection, which I do not recommend that you do because and if you are negotiating, I just want to say this as a caveat too, if you're negotiating a deal where your client says, I don't want to do a home inspection, I don't need to do a home inspection, you need to sign some kind of hold harmless agreement with that buyer to protect yourself, because you don't want the buyer to figure out after they've bought this house that there's a $50,000 structural issue and they come after you and sue you because they say that you did not appropriately advise them on the importance of doing a home inspection. So if my client isn't going to do an inspection, if they're not going to do an appraisal, if they're not going to get a survey, okay, that's another big item, is the buyer going to do a survey? If they decide not to do one of those items, I have them sign a hold harmless agreement that basically states that I advised them to do this, but that they decided not to on their own cognizance. Okay, that was their choice to do that. So as a protective measure, I would highly recommend that you do that. And if you would like me to send you, I'll share with Amy Leo like an example of what that hold harmless agreement would look like on that front. But back to my point, we've negotiated a lot of deals not contingent on a home inspection, or where the buyer says, I get the right to do a home inspection, but I will take the property as is. But I still maintain the right to be able to walk away from the deal if something comes up in that home inspection that I don't like, but that I won't come back and ask you for repairs, seller. Another one would be where you agree to do you ask for a home inspection, but you limit the liability for seller repairs. So you say, I have the right to do a home inspection. I have 10 days to do my home inspection, but I promise seller that I won't ask you for more than $2,000 worth of repairs. Well, any buyer that does a home inspection will probably find $2,000 worth of stuff. So if you are on the listing side and you're working an offer like that, just expect that the buyer will inevitably come up with $2,000 worth of repairs to be made. But these are the kinds of things that we can do in crafting offers to kind of help give our offer a leg up. And these would be the kind of things that I would hope to be able to negotiate for my seller in a multiple offer situation as well, because there's nothing that says that even if the buyer doesn't offer that on the front end, that you can't counteroffer with terms like that as well.
That was really helpful. Thank you.
You are welcome. Anybody else? Okie dokie. All right. Well, thank you all for joining today. I appreciate it. And if anybody at any point has any questions, I've been teaching Ignite classes probably for about 7 years. Previously at KW Louisville office, and I have been in charge of education under the ALC also at my previous KW office. And I've mentored a lot of agents in coming into the business. So if anybody ever has just general questions or industry questions, you are more than welcome to shoot me an email or give me a phone call. I'm always happy to lend my ear or give some advice to newer agents, because I know how difficult it is starting out as a new agent. You feel like you've been dropped in a sea of information and you're like trying to claw your way to land. And also just how hard it is to build a ground game in general as a new agent, but how difficult it is even more so in the age of COVID. So my door is always open. If anybody ever has any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. All right. Okay, with that, you all have a great day. I'm going to sign out.
Thanks, Libby.
On Monday. Yep, no problem. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.